There is something profoundly sacred about the early morning hours, an almost mystical stillness that envelops the world before it stirs into motion. It is in this quiet space that we encounter a dimension of existence often lost to the noise of our daily lives. When we wake up early, not merely as a matter of routine but with conscious intent, we are granted access to a psychological terrain that is both fertile and undisturbed. And in this space, we begin to see more clearly not only the world around us, but the inner workings of our own minds. Carl Jung spoke often of the necessity of encountering the self, the deeper part of our psyche that exists beyond the ego, beyond the roles we perform throughout the day. The early morning, untouched by the demands of society, offers a rare opportunity to meet that self without interruption. There is no flood of emails, no meetings, no traffic, only silence and the raw, unfiltered mind. This silence is not empty. It is rich, layered, and alive. It allows for reflection and, more importantly, for confrontation. It is in this quiet that we often begin to hear what we have been avoiding. When we wake into this space, we aren't just gaining extra hours on the clock. We're reclaiming a deeper form of presence. We're no longer swept up by external momentum. We become the authors of our own tempo. And that shift, though subtle, has profound implications. Most people wake up reacting to alarms, to obligations, to the demands of others. But those who wake before the noise, those who claim the morning as their own, step into the day already grounded. They are no longer mere participants in time, but co-creators of it. There is also a biological and psychological rhythm at play here. In the early morning, cortisol levels, the hormones that help us feel alert and focused, naturally peak. Our minds are at their most clear and responsive. But beyond neurochemistry, something deeper unfolds. In Jungian terms, we might say the ego is still soft from sleep, not yet rigid with the armor of identity. In this state, we're more permeable to insight. Creative ideas surface, patterns become visible, emotional truths rise unprovoked. To ignore this time is to ignore a natural portal to inner knowing. Yet so many of us fear the quiet. The moment we wake, we fill the void with noise, scrolling, checking, consuming. But the early morning doesn't ask us to consume. It asks us to witness, to sit with ourselves, to be rather than to perform. And that is no small task. In fact, for many, it is uncomfortable. But the discomfort is revealing. It tells us where we are fragmented, where we are distracted, where we are estranged from our own experience. By learning to inhabit this silence, we become more than just efficient. We become integrated. We begin the day not as fractured selves, scrambling to catch up, but as whole individuals, aligned with something deeper than the to-do list. We reclaim a kind of sovereignty over our time and, by extension, over our lives. This is not about productivity in the shallow sense, the hustle, the grind, the metrics. It's about deep productivity which begins not with action but with awareness. When we wake up early and enter the day from a place of reflection, we make different choices. We speak differently. We listen more carefully. We respond rather than react. And in that space, we begin to live not just according to habit, but according to intention. The early morning, then, is not merely a time slot. It is a threshold, a psychological doorway through which we can choose to walk deliberately, consciously. And when we do, we find that the day ahead bends to meet us, not in obedience, but in alignment. Because we have met ourselves first. We have grounded our presence before dispersing it into the world. That is the quiet power of waking up early. Not the extra hours gained, but the depth reclaimed. So I leave you with this. If you want to change your life, don't start with what you do. Start with when you wake, and what you do in that first hour, when the world is still whispering. That is the hour that reveals who you are and who you could become. Discipline is a word that often conjures images of rigid structure, of self-denial, of duty at the expense of desire. But if we step back, if we look at it not from the surface of routine, but from the depths of the psyche, we begin to see that discipline is not punishment, it is orientation, a compass that points the ego toward the self, toward integration. And perhaps nowhere is this more evident than in the simple, deliberate act of waking up early. To rise before we must, to get up when there is no one watching, when no one is demanding it of us. This is a psychological act of sovereignty. We are not responding to an external threat or reward. We are responding to something internal, something subtler and more enduring. It is the will to order one's life in harmony with what one values most deeply. Carl Jung often spoke of the conflict between the ego and the self, the part of us that wants comfort, predictability, the familiar, and the part that yearns for wholeness, individuation, growth. The discipline of waking early is a daily microcosm of that inner tension. The body wants to stay in bed, the mind offers excuses, but beneath both is a quieter voice, the one that says, "Get up, begin, step into becoming." And every time we listen to that voice, we strengthen the bridge between who we are and who we are capable of becoming. There's a reason this act feels hard. It's not just about sleep or motivation, it's about identity. Waking early requires us to interrupt our habitual narrative. It's a confrontation with inertia. And when we break that inertia, even in this small way, we prove to ourselves that we are not merely creatures of habit, we are agents of transformation. Each time we rise early by choice, we reinforce the reality that we can act in alignment with intention rather than impulse. This, psychologically speaking, is how momentum is born, not from grand gestures, but from consistent, humble acts that accumulate over time. The discipline of the early morning is cumulative. It builds a psychological structure, a framework in which we start to see ourselves differently. We begin to trust our own word. And when we trust ourselves, we can begin to move through life with clarity and strength. And let us be clear, this is not about perfection. It's not about becoming a machine that performs flawlessly each morning. In fact, the value lies in the struggle itself. Jung understood that the psyche develops through tension, through the dynamic interplay of opposites. When we struggle to get up and still choose to rise, we are embodying this very principle. We're not erasing the shadow, we are integrating it. We are acknowledging the resistance, the fatigue, the fear, and still choosing to move. This is where discipline becomes something far deeper than habit. It becomes a relationship, not with time or routine, but with the self. It's an agreement we renew each day, not because it's easy, but because it reminds us of who we are when no one is watching. And that reminder, that experience of our own inner resolve, is invaluable. It echoes throughout the rest of the day, because if we can overcome resistance first thing in the morning, we are more prepared to face the subtler resistances that will arise later, the fear of failure, the pull toward distraction, the temptation to remain small. What begins as a single act, getting up early, ripples outward into every domain of life. It's not just that we have more time, it's that we have more self, more alignment, more inner clarity. And from that clarity, better choices emerge. We stop being at the mercy of the moment. We begin to move with intention, even in the face of difficulty. In the language of Jung, this is individuation in motion, the slow, often uncomfortable movement toward becoming more whole. And discipline, when rightly understood, is not a tool to oppress ourselves. It is the spine of that movement. It gives structure to our growth. It is how we contain the chaos without denying it, how we step into the fire without being consumed. So yes, waking up early takes effort. It will never be easy, and it is not meant to be. But within that difficulty lies its meaning. It is not a punishment. It is a portal, a small, consistent way of saying, I am willing to meet life on my terms. I am willing to lead, not follow, to respond, not react. And if that is the spirit we bring to our mornings, then we don't just start the day, we shape it, we lead it, we build momentum, not just for action, but for becoming. So I leave you with this. The person you are becoming is shaped not in the big moments, but in the small choices you make when no one is looking. Let waking up early be one of those choices. Let it be the first movement toward the version of you that does not wait to be told, but simply rises. In the quiet of early morning, Before the world has begun to pull at your attention, there exists a window, brief but wide open, for self-encounter, and not in the superficial sense of self-care or self-improvement as it's often marketed to us, but in the truer, deeper sense of self-acknowledge and self-formation. When you wake up early and the day has not yet rushed in with its roles and responsibilities, you meet yourself unguarded. That is when the work of inner growth can actually begin. Carl Jung insisted that the goal of life was individuation, the process by which a person becomes the most authentic version of themselves, integrating all parts of the psyche, the conscious and unconscious, the known and unknown. But individuation doesn't happen by accident. It requires space, attention, and above all, intention. And this is why those early hours matter. They are not just extra time to be productive. They are sacred psychological territory where the ego is not yet armored and where insight is more accessible. In these moments, you are not yet performing. You are not yet reacting to what others need from you. You are, in a very real sense, free. That freedom is fragile. It slips away quickly. But if we learn to inhabit it, even briefly, we begin to create conditions for growth. Real growth. Not the kind driven by external goals or social validation, but the kind that comes from aligning more closely with who we truly are. What you choose to do in this space is deeply personal. Some may journal, reflecting on the patterns of their thoughts. Others may read philosophy, walk in silence, or sit in meditation. These are not just tasks or techniques, they are rituals of inward orientation. They are ways of cultivating the inner life, of building a relationship with the self beyond the persona. And over time, they serve as scaffolding, psychological supports that allow us to expand into greater complexity without losing coherence. Think about how most of us live, pulled in a dozen directions, constantly responding, constantly adapting to what is asked of us. In that state, it is difficult, if not impossible, to ask the deeper questions. What do I value? What do I fear? What am I becoming? We live on the surface, but surface living breeds anxiety and fatigue because we are not rooted in anything real. We are merely surviving our schedules. The early morning offers a profound alternative. It is a return to depth. And in that return, something remarkable happens. Clarity emerges. Not necessarily answers, but space. Space to hold the questions with greater patience and less panic. And that space is what allows transformation to take root. Jung believed that inner growth was not a linear process. It is not a straight path from confusion to certainty. It is a spiral, a dance between the conscious and unconscious, a willingness to live in tension without demanding resolution. That kind of growth can't be rushed, but it can be welcomed. By consistently using the early morning for inner work, we become more attuned to our inner world, and as that awareness increases, so too does our capacity to navigate the outer world with integrity. We stop outsourcing our identity to circumstance. We stop letting the day define us before we have defined it. This doesn't mean becoming rigid or controlling. Quite the opposite. It means we develop a flexible center, an inner stability that allows us to move through life with a kind of quiet authority. There's also something symbolic, almost archetypal, about beginning the day with intention. Across cultures and traditions, dawn has always carried spiritual weight. It is the liminal moment between night and day, between unconsciousness and consciousness. To rise with that transition and to use it for self-examination is to align oneself with a universal rhythm. It is to say, as the world wakes, so do I. Not just physically, but inwardly. And here's the most important part. This practice is not about being perfect. Some mornings you will miss. Some mornings you will be tired or distracted or resistant. That's part of it. The resistance is not the enemy. It is the teacher, because it reveals where the work still lies. Jung wrote that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And often, it is in those tired, foggy moments that we meet the parts of ourselves we've been avoiding. So don't wait for the ideal conditions. Don't wait for inspiration. Wake early anyway. Sit with yourself anyway. The very act of showing up is transformative. It tells the psyche, I am here, I am listening, I am willing to grow. And that willingness, practiced consistently, becomes character. It becomes presence. It becomes a way of being in the world that is both grounded and expansive. So I leave you with this. The most fertile ground for your growth lies in the hour when the world is silent and your soul is loudest. Make room for it and watch who you become. There is something undeniably sacred about how a day begins, the first moments of consciousness. Those soft, fleeting seconds between dream and waking form the psychological foundation upon which the rest of the day is constructed. Most people miss this. They rush past it, pulled immediately into the momentum of obligations, distractions, and demands. But what if those early minutes, those first quiet choices, carry far more power than we assume? What if the way we begin is not just a prelude, but a prophecy? Carl Jung taught that our lives are shaped not merely by external events, but by the meaning we give them. The symbolic layer of our experience, the inner interpretation of outer reality, forms the core of how we live. And in this sense, the morning is not just a practical period of time, it is a psychological threshold. It is a crossing from unconsciousness into awareness, and how we cross that threshold matters deeply. If we begin our day reactively, reaching immediately for our phones, diving headfirst into comparison, consumption, or urgency, we are training the psyche to expect life as a series of external demands. We are relinquishing authorship over the day. We are saying, without realizing it, tell me who I am, tell me what to think, tell me what to feel. And the world, noisier, faster, and more fragmented than ever, is all too happy to oblige. But if, instead, we begin with presence, with a few moments of stillness, breath, attention, then we are telling the psyche something else entirely. We are saying, I begin with myself. I am here. I choose how I enter the world today. That choice, repeated day after day, rewires more than habit. It rewires identity. It restores agency. This is not a call for romanticizing the morning, nor is it a prescription for perfection. It is a recognition of the symbolic depth encoded in small beginnings. Jung understood symbols not as signs, but as expressions of psychological truths that the conscious mind cannot fully articulate. The morning, then, becomes a living symbol of emergence, of rebirth, of potential. And how we relate to that symbol either reinforces our wholeness or fragments it further. It's easy to underestimate the power of this. One might think, what difference does it make if I get up a bit earlier, if I sit in silence, if I make my bed with care? But this is precisely the point. It is in the smallest acts that we declare our alignment with the deeper forces within us. To begin the day intentionally is to step into life with coherence between the inner world and the outer one. That coherence is what Jung would call individuation in action, the slow, deliberate unification of who we are and who we are becoming. And what flows from this intention is not just productivity or efficiency, though those may come. What flows is a different quality of attention, a different way of meeting the world. You begin to notice more, you listen more fully, you respond rather than react. Life ceases to be something that happens to you and becomes something that emerges from you. Of course, there will be days when it doesn't go this way. Days when the morning feels like a battle, or when circumstances pull you out of yourself before you're ready. That's part of it. The goal is not to control the morning, but to honor it. Even brief moments of awareness can create a break in the unconscious pattern. A deep breath, a conscious sip of coffee, a moment at the window watching the light arrive. These are not trivial, they are thresholds. And every threshold offers a choice. Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is the heart of it. The morning is the first best chance each day to bring the unconscious into awareness, to choose not just what you will do, but how you will be. Will you meet the day scattered, disoriented, already behind, or will you meet it grounded, whole, and inwardly aligned? The way we begin is the way we continue, and the way we continue is the shape of our lives. So I leave you with this. Each morning is a rehearsal for the life you are creating. Begin as if it matters, because it does.